Well, welcome to my podcast, which does not have a name yet, Henry. Thanks for being the first guest.
Congratulations on having a podcast.
Thank you.
But I'm very proud to be your first guest.
Thank you for being here.
It's appropriate since we come from the same neighborhood, same origins.
Practically the same neighborhood. Around the corner from me is where you grew up.
Correct. So this is another part of our origin story.
That's right.
Originating your podcast.
Yes, thank you. One of the things I wanted to talk with you about is so timely because we just saw on television the burial of Queen Elizabeth, and her son, the now King Charles III, was in San Antonio while you were mayor of San Antonio. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And over the course of the last week, I've gotten a lot of calls from people asking me to comment on the Queen's visit, which came in 1991. I wasn't mayor any longer. Lila Cockrell was. But people wanted to talk about the Queen's visit on the river and so forth. But the truth of the matter is what's relevant going forward is that the King came to San Antonio as Prince Charles. And that was about 1986. And when we were making the arrangements for touring him and showing him around the city and so forth, he said what he was interested in was things that relate to human capital, dealing with services to people, children, those who are marginalized. Because his portfolio given him by the Queen in England in those days was the big trouble they were having in the so-called Midlands, cities like Birmingham and others that had seen their best days in terms of industry. And there was a lot of high unemployment and a lot of human suffering. And he was looking for solutions. So we took him to see Avance with children, the program here in San Antonio that is famous for helping mothers from prenatal days through the early days of a child. We took him to new housing that we had just built west of the downtown on the west side and other community endeavors, Guadalupe Street and so forth. And he was taken with it all. It was a rare treat for me because as mayor, and I guess in 1986, I would have been about 38 or something like that. So he's a couple of years younger. He would have been like 36 at the time. And we were just the two of us in the back of a car. And so he was sharing with me, just his thoughts on the world, equity issues, environmental issues, architectural issues, and what it was like to be the husband of a young woman, Princess Diana. And he was saying how they really didn't see eye to eye on some issues because her experience as a young woman was different than his and what he had been studying. So I was a little embarrassed to have the conversation.
Because of what we know now.
Because of what transpired later. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the way that all ended. Tragically. But I came away with a great kind of simpatia for him. I liked him. And, people caricature him over the years for appearance or for fuddy-duddiness, social awkwardness. But I enjoyed the time, and I had been in touch with him once or twice in the years since when I went to Washington and such. And I always thought, this is a person who carries a very heavy burden and responsibility. And now he is the King of England and the Commonwealth. And there will be changes. And it will be difficult following a mother who had 70 years and was beloved. And the world has changed and is more complicated. So I don't envy him the burden he has. But I am hopeful that people will see him as a genuine, sincere human being having given this platform, being given this platform to use it to help other people across the world. And I do believe that he's going to be trying. That has been consistently kind of his ideals. So I'm hopeful that this is not a time in which they try to undo the monarchy, or I've come to the conclusion that the monarchy plays a role in England that is different than what we have in the United States. When we make political change, it is change. and we go from one party to the other, one personality to another overnight. Peaceful transference of power,
Usually.
except for last year.
Usually.
But in England, there is the monarchy that stands as a continuity of national purpose, an umbrella overarching the political change that they make. And I think it has served them well. It serves a purpose.
It serves a purpose. Although I think that there's going to be a lot of change.
I think there will be.
And he will be remembered for that.
He'll be tested for sure.
One of the questions I always have for you, and I still don't understand, and I must ask again for our audience, is what you do now. Because I'll admit that I don't pay much attention when you answer this question, but now it'll be taped so I can review it.
Well, not only that, but other people may understand who are listening.
And God bless them.
What I do, I have multiple things that I'm involved in, but the principal commitment that I have is to a company that I created called American Triple I, and the Triple I stands for Infrastructure, Innovation, and Investment. And what Triple I does is raise large sums of institutional capital and invest it in large infrastructure projects that have the need for private capital. So, for example, Elaine, right now, we're about a month away from closing on a $300+ million investment of capital that our company has raised into JFK Airport Terminals 6 and 7, the new JetBlue terminals there. We're also involved in a heavy rail project in Los Angeles that will link the LAX airport area with the San Fernando Valley. We are involved in cargo facilities at major airports, upgrading them because the pandemic has put a new emphasis on air cargo because people are using social media to order things so much these days. And therefore, they don't need brick and mortar stores. They need air routes, air facilities for delivery. So that is changing in our country very, very dramatically. So that's kind of what we do. My son, John Paul, who many people in San Antonio ask for all the time,
yes,
is a member of that firm. We're based in New York in the Chrysler Building. And I'm back and forth from New York about every third week or so for a week. But live in San Antonio, redeveloped a building on the west side, involved in local causes related to the west side, related to trying to create San Antonio's first arboretum, and have many commitments across the country.
People don't realize, I think, that you are such a lover of trees and have grown some from like seedlings, correct?
I have had some experiences where I'm sitting under a 300-year-old tree, and I just feel like there's some kind of imparted peace and wisdom in that great living thing. Mm-hmm. And many cities in America have what they call an arboretum, which is a place where you can respect the indigenous trees of that region. And the head of the National Arboretum in Washington, which I visited, told me that our region has a broader range of indigenous trees than almost any other part of the United States because we have, the seasons. Mm-hmm. And so locally we have all the trees we know, pecans and cypresses and mulberries and box elders and mesquites and all kinds of oaks, live oaks and white oaks and all kinds of oaks, and many trees from Mexico here, and aqua and all others, plums. And so we just are blessed with some very majestic trees. In fact, I have books on the trees of Texas, and there's a lot of places in Texas that have historic legacy trees where something important happened, like documents were signed to end mm-hmm. a war, for example, mm-hmm. and they're still standing there.
It's amazing.
Yeah. So I'm working on trying to get the city, county, water authority, river authority, and others working together to create a space on the south side, hopefully near the missions, near our water features like the San Antonio River and the Medina, where people could go and say, these are not only beautiful species for us to enjoy of trees, but they have scientific value.
Yes.
Because people can go and say, well, this has this origin and this species and this genus, et cetera.
And there's a connection between this idea of an arboretum to Texas A&M. Is that correct? Are they involved?
A&M has a strong agri-life commitment. And they do have people who specialize in trees and shrubs and flowers and such. So yes, A&M will be involved. They're involved in this one because one of the areas we've looked at for the Arboretum was gifted by TJX to Texas A&M and to the San Antonio River Authority along the river near Mission Espada. And that would bring Texas A&M into it. So lots of things to be gained for San Antonio. Students will go there. Families will go there. People will take wedding pictures there. Classes will go for scientific purposes. Garden advocates can give volunteer time. It's a beautiful thing, and I think San Antonio is a city that particularly appreciates the canopy of trees that we have.
And we
because
need
of
more,
our rivers.
And we need more of them environmentally.
Yes, they are great consumers of carbon dioxide that make our air quality better. And they add shade that drops the temperature 10 or 15 degrees where they exist. So there's a lot of things to... Yeah.
Trees are beautiful.
And you have some beautiful trees at your house.
I love trees.
Pecans.
And pecans are probably my favorite.
Yeah.
I love pecans. Okay, the next time I have a good crop, te traigo. Okay, so now we have to move on to something timely and far more serious, even though I think trees are pretty serious. Immigration, both legal and illegal, remain contentious, divisive issues, and the most recent being Governor Ron DeSantis's decision to transport a group of migrants from San Antonio to Martha's Vineyard in a way of protesting illegal immigration. The reality is, in my column today, I talk about that these are legal migrants. They've applied for asylum and at least initially have passed the test. So what's your take on all of these issues coming and clashing against one another?
I think the broken immigration system that we have in our country is fixable. And I've always felt that way. Over the last 3 decades or so that I've been involved in working on immigration in one form or another, and right now I'm chairman of a group in Washington called the Bipartisan Policy Center that has a major focus on trying to fix the immigration system. Most people have concluded it's got 3 basic elements: protection of the border, because you can't have a porous border and be a country. In other words, that's what defines your country versus another country is where's the line? And does it mean something on the ground? A second piece is to provide some measure of involvement for people who are here in an undocumented capacity, and trying to put them in a way that they can become citizens and make their way to citizenship. Short of that is a third piece, which is during that period, they have some legal status. They're not illegals, sort of second-class shadows, in the background of a city, but they have a role to play. And that in our country is important because we need the workers. We have many jobs.
We need the workers.
We need the workers. We need the workers in the fields, picking the crops that no one else would pick in the middle of the 100-degree days. We need people working on the roofs of buildings, fixing the construction work. We need workers. And when we don't have workers, then many jobs, right now there's a massive delay in building in San Antonio, for example. We have a lot of demand for craftsmen. So there's a lot of reasons to fix the system. And it works to the benefit not just of those who come seeking a better life, but to those of us who are here and enjoying a good life and wanting to have particular services and products and so forth, including food, good food. So for all those reasons, we need to get it fixed. Unfortunately, immigration has become a political pawn and one of those wedge issues that people use to make political points. George Bush, when he was president, the second George Bush, Governor Bush, then president of the United States, was working on precisely these three things that I described: reasonable border protections, legalization of status, and then eventual path to citizenship. And then 9/11 happened.
And everything fell apart.
Everything fell apart. The president of Mexico was here the week before, and they had agreed to work on fixing the system. And then suddenly the fear was that's the way terrorists come in, and it began to be used as a political issue. Well, there's never been a major threat of terroristic activity entering from the southern border.
Never.
But it was touted that way and used as a fear-mongering device. Indeed, the people who committed the atrocities on 9/11 came from the northern border and got in from Canada. So unfortunately, it's an easy shot when what you're really attacking is people of other ethnic backgrounds and other political views, but using immigration and immigrants as the device to do that. So I've been hoping that this fever will break and that we'll work our way through this awful period of contentiousness that we're in. And then we can get back to a rational discussion about the workers that we need, the kinds of permits they need to work, and some normal system. Things like the game playing of the last week, collecting people and sending them to Hyannisport and sending them to the vice president's house, Governor DeSantis and Governor Abbott, don't help. I mean, it's just a play. It has no basis in real policy, and it's a shame. So I hope that we can lower the voices and instead open up our eyes to some realities and figure out how to work this out. I believe the elements of a resolution are in place. They're not easy. They require some reasonableness and temperance on all sides, but we've got to learn to live together with another country, in this case, Mexico and the nations to the south.
And you mentioned 9/11 and the state that we were in at the time, which I recall, there was terror. There was definitely an
after 9/11?
After
for
9/11.
Sure.
And now what we have is a problem with domestic terrorism, a terror within, and reflect on that a little bit. And the fears
true.
among others, perhaps.
It's true that we have raised our voices to the point that we're not even making sense anymore. And people have chosen sides, and they're very, very stark problems. And the first tendency is to sort of place blame on the other side. And unfortunately, we've gotten, I think, coarser, more cruel in our assessments of each other as elements of the population. The debates that were the cultural wars about pro-life and choice and so forth, the debates about guns, the debates about immigration, endless debates about gender and LGBT issues and trans and et cetera. We're in a bad place. Now, I have found in the past that when we elect leaders who try to sincerely speak to kind of rational logic, that we can still get people to listen. We have to explain a lot, but get people to listen and hopefully come off of the far extremes and move towards something that feels like a consensus. That's the work I'm involved in today at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Key word, bipartisan. Doesn't mean nonpartisan. You have your views, you have your sides, but there can be some middle ground positions found on these questions. And I believe the American people are still there. I do believe that. We need to have explanation. The 4 years of Trump did not help because those were mostly attack and in the strangest kind of ways. I think the election of 2024 is going to be take us to the edge of civil war. And some people in the country are talking that kind of language. Mm-hmm. But I would hope that at some point, as I say, the fever will break and we can talk to people and talk to each other in rational ways. My personal philosophy is I like people and I like people's stories. And everybody, no matter what their age, no matter what their background, has a story to tell about their life. And if we could just listen to each other and put ourselves in other people's places and understand what's important to them and why they believe the way they do, on most things, we can find some common ground. But we're not listening right now.
There's common ground in Mexican food, don't you think?
Some.
I think there's lots of it.
For some, it's too hot. For some, it's too spicy. For some, it's not spicy enough.
Okay.
But a taco is a good place to start.
Oh, a taco is an excellent place to start.
And tequila might even be better.
Oh, yeah. I like how you're talking. You mentioned the elections of 24, but before us are the midterms, and Texas is in contention, I think. I've been watching a lot of the polls, and they certainly still show that many of the people now in office will probably get reelected. But there are so many that believe that Democrats have a chance at statewide elections. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
I would say, just objectively speaking, that Texas is a red state, and it'll be difficult to convert it from being a red-leaning state. There are a lot of factors why that's the case. Immigrants who've come from other states who come here to escape environmental regulations or business regulations, and they bring a redder view. The suburbs of the big cities are pretty red in Texas. The rural areas are red. Some portions of the Latino population are becoming more red because they live in areas where they're pro-gun and they have small businesses and they're evangelicals and they believe.
And they're anti-immigrant.
And some of them are anti-immigrant. So Texas is pretty red. But it's also true that some political leaders have stayed a long time and things are not better on their watch. And Governor Abbott may be one of those who's been there for a long time and then doing some things that don't appeal to reasonable people, like rounding people up and shipping them to the vice president's house in Washington. That's a political stunt, and some people see through it. Do I think Beto can win? I suspect there's some odd bounce of the ball where he could, but he didn't help himself when he says on the stage, we're coming for your guns. Or other things that he has done that are not sort of the normal midstream Texas way. So I think it's going to be an interesting election, but you would have to begin from the objective position that it would take a special set of circumstances for Beto O'Rourke and other Democrats to win statewide at this point, given the kind of the ugliness of the mood in Texas.
Rochelle Garza, who's running for Attorney General, is an interesting race because Ken Paxton is
multiple indictments,
and facing all sorts of problems. Reflect on that one a little bit. Does she have a better chance?
That's just an example of how far we are. That you could have an Attorney General, the highest law official of the state, with multiple indictments, beating very reasonable people like George P. Bush in the primary, Republican primary, and then leading in the polls now. So again, same rules that I applied earlier. It's really, really tough to beat that sort of red momentum of the moment in Texas.
San Antonio remains the 7th largest city in the country, and it's handling or not handling growth very well, and especially related to housing, especially related to affordable housing.
Right.
And on the west side, where you live and I live, the pressures of gentrification are very real.
Mm-hmm.
What's the future?
Well, first of all, I think San Antonio is handling growth better than most. The problems in every aspect, whether it's traffic or water or power or housing costs in San Antonio, is less severe than what we're seeing in Houston, Dallas, or Austin. But we are growing, and we are steadily growing, and there's no end to the growth in sight. So the smart thing to do is to build the infrastructure to prepare. And that means investing not just in more roadways, but in mass transit, including rail. And it means making sure we have adequate water beyond the Edwards Aquifer, which is what the Vista Ridge pipeline was about. And it means having adequate power, and that's why we're very close to leading the country in the amount of renewables that we utilize, solar and wind, in our power grid. And we still have housing that's more affordable than the rest of the state. But because of our inattention over too many years to affordable housing, we have about 150,000 unit gap in adequate, affordable housing, both rental and ownership. So we just need to produce more, and produce more that's within the range of upwardly mobile families, where they can get from that rental house to their own home ownership, or young people who are coming into our workforce can have their first rental decent apartment. So production is a big part of it. And then a range of things that we will do related to anti-gentrification, anti-displacement in the areas that are growing. The West Side is one of those. We're working now through a series of different task forces and work groups to put in place strategies like land trusts and others to acquire properties and keep them at a reasonable price, instead of having outside speculators come in, drive up the prices, and build the wrong kind of thing, in terms of the quality of life and the heritage of areas like the West Side, or the East Side, Dingawoody Hill and Government Hill, or on the South Side around the Missions. So those are all things that have to be done.
Well, tell us about your new book.
Well, I've had the good fortune of being involved in a number of projects, book projects over the years. I'm presently finishing up a project with a woman named Catherine Cook here in San Antonio, who's known for the biographies that she's done of San Antonians like Tom Slick and Lila Cockrell and others. And we were asked by a group out of Nashville to write what is effectively a coffee table book, but with more narrative than usual, on the modern history of San Antonio, the turning point that began with Hemisphere and then went through the era of cops and rebalancing the power in the city, creating greater access, single-member districts, the massive investments like in drainage in the poor neighborhoods that were flooded out, preparing for growth in the future, coming through the pandemic. So that's the themes of this new piece of work. And we're blessed with some great photography of the city, the colors of our city, the scenes of our city.
Who are your photographers, or who are you pulling
from? It's a range
from?
of photographers that were brought about to do this. And we hope that the book will be ready within another month or so. So it's a Christmas buy for people. So I'm excited about it.
Excellent.
In terms of my news sites, I read the Express News every morning.
Well, thank you very much, sir.
I watch CNN virtually full time. Catch the local news on any of the local stations, but I sort of move around them, including Univision. And then I am on my cell phone a lot, and I have the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, San Antonio paper for when I'm out of town.
How about the Washington Post?
I don't have the Post on there.
You're missing out.
And then of course, my favorite on the phone is ESPN and the scores of games.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll give you that.
In terms of reading, I'm always reading one or two books. And right now, because we have built this private library at the redeveloped shop that we did on the west side, I've really gotten into kind of seminal books that define a period. So, for example, Arnold Toynbee's book on a study of history, war, and civilization. That's a classic, right? It lasts decades and decades and decades and still be relevant. One of the great books that's taught at West Point on matters of national security is called On War by von Clausewitz. Ask any military person and they'll tell you that they had to read that. And it's exceedingly relevant right now in light of what Russia's doing in Ukraine, because it's basically the rules of warfare. And though they were written in the 1800s, it still accurately describes the power moves and the resources and the massing of resources and the political will and what constitutes the conditions for victory, etc. Fascinating what's going on in the Ukraine right now. I am enamored of the Ukrainians and their courage.
Me too.
Men and women, soldiers and civilians. It's just
on the ground.
It's incredible. And I don't think we as a people in America have sufficient.
They're all
we need
heroes.
to stop every day and reflect and pray for these people, because what the Soviets are doing, what the Russians are doing, is as immoral as anything we have seen in the history of mankind, including Hitler and other dictatorships, Mussolini and way back into history. There's just no justification for it whatsoever, and there's no justification for the attacks on civilians and the deaths that are occurring and the cruelties that are being imposed. It is absolutely unacceptable in modern mankind. And the Russians have been shown who they are. I mean, there's something wrong with that culture that would allow that to happen.
For sure.
I mean, something deep in the DNA of the way that modern nation developed that would allow people to stand by and watch their leaders do that. So anyway, that's what I read. That's what I care about.
I love that you're collecting this sort of library.
This is kind of a classics library.
I love that.
Yeah.
On the west side of San Antonio in an old print shop with historic beginnings.
Yeah, well, we're using it actually in real life to help the kids from the neighborhood. And we ask the counselors to send us kids who are especially gifted in terms of being able to go to college, but have not yet made the decision or have any idea about how to choose a college. And we bring them in on Saturday mornings. And you attended one Saturday morning. You know what our little cohort is like. And we had one little girl from Lanier, number one in her class, but really hadn't thought through college. And she applied to 6 schools with our assistance and got accepted at 6 schools. And she's at the University of Texas in Austin right this minute.
Oh,
another young man went to Jefferson High School. He applied to 10 schools, got into 10 schools.
Just beautiful.
So that's how we're using the library. But I'm using it as a collection of, important classics in history, in economics, in philosophy, and in basically international affairs.
Well, it's been wonderful to have you here. Thank you for being my first guest.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good luck with the podcast.
Thank you.
You're a great conversationalist. You always have been over lunch. So I know you're going to be over the microphone as well.
Thanks so much, Henry. Good luck.